I was doing a show. There was a little girl sitting in the front row, and she, I found out later that she's a mixed kid, and she had curly hair like mine. And she wrote a note to the theater about how like I liked the show a lot, and I really thought it was really fun, and I thought that maybe I would want to do that, but I don't know how. But then I saw the creature that had curly hair and looked like me, and when she waved at me, it made me feel really special and happy, and I want to see more of that. Battling imposter syndrome is kind of a constant, struggle and a constant journey, especially when you do find yourself feeling very different from the other people in the room, to constantly be like, am I supposed to be here? And then to just be like, no, absolutely I'm supposed to be here, because that little girl in the front row maybe wants to be here one day too. And it might be easier for her if she has this person. If I had seen this person, I would maybe have been a little bit more bold in the way that I moved, in the world as a young artist as well. So it really is nice in a way, because it's not about me. It's about that girl in the front row with the curly hair that wants to see more of the goofy lemur creature that looks like her rolling around on stage,
Hey everyone. One of the first discussions we shared on She Lights the Way was with artist, author, and dancer Zaji Cox. Among other things, Zaji talked about just how big an influence her big sister was on her journey. This was so compelling that I felt like we really needed to meet this big sister. So today, we're sitting down with her big sis, Bevin Victoria. Bevin is an actor, dancer, martial artist, and overall incredible talent. From her devastating injury that ended her Olympic dreams to mastering her craft as a full-time artist, Bevin's journey has been about grit, reinvention, and unapologetic passion. Let's dive in.
Bevin, it's so wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for spending time with us on She Lights the Way.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Can you introduce yourself, to tell us a little bit about you and where you are now in your own journey?
I'm Bevin Victoria. I'm an actor, singer, dancer, composer, writer, director, and sometimes producer when I have to be, and martial artist, and I do fight choreography for film as well. Right now, working, full-time in the industry, meaning balancing jobs between like acting jobs, being on set, doing mostly commercial work, and I'm writing a musical right now, co-writing a musical, and I do a lot of dance work and dance teaching, and so it's kind of the constant juggling of jobs all the time, but I'm really fortunate to be working full-time in the field that that is my craft and my like life's passion, and as well as my livelihood. So yeah, I'm at an interesting place in my career right now where I'm not at a crossroads per se, but kind of transitioning away from something I've been doing pretty like fully focused on for like the last decade or so, and transitioning into something slightly different, adjacent, and with this musical, and most of my time spent doing that. And so it's an exciting time.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's been a real evolution, and you're about to make yet another pivot or shift. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the experiences that were pivotal for you along your journey to land you where you are today?
I was an athlete as a kid. My number one, well, I'd say my top two goals, because they were always like, almost equally important all the time, as long as I could remember, is I wanted to be an Olympian and I wanted to be a professional actor. Or at the very least an entertainer, work in media and work in entertainment, specifically acting and dancing and singing. So to me, in the before times when I was a young child, that specifically meant obviously musical theater, obviously, because that was where I could combine all of those interests. I had a pretty catastrophic injury when I was 12, almost 13, and that kind of ended my like Olympic dreams, in gymnastics at least. And so I started or continued working pretty seriously as, developing my skills as a dancer and as a vocalist and as an actor as well. And so that was the first kind of big moment where it was like, oh, maybe life is not going to go how I've planned, even though I've devoted my whole life, my whole short 12 years, but seemed like a long time at the time, of course, to this very specific thing. But it taught me so much and gave me so many like just essential skills that it was a transition that I had to make, but it was something that it helped me lead me into my next steps, so to speak. And then later on down the line, as a teenager, I got involved in another sport and kind of had the Olympic rings pop up in my eyes again for a little while. But that was as I was becoming like, an older adolescent and a young adult, and navigating that, plus going to school full time and working full time and being a full-time athlete. There's only so many hours in the day. And so I started to kind of stratify, like things took precedence over others. And I'm pretty happy with the career I had in athletics, and it's not necessarily over yet, but that was kind of the time when I really started to focus on to kind of let a career, like sort of, so to speak, in athletics go, and really, really turn my attention to working full time on being an actor and a dancer and a vocalist and a performing artist, and just really honing my craft as well. So since that point in time, I've been balancing kind of, on-screen work, on stage work, and kind of navigating how, like, really finding the way to negotiate those things with each other, because they really are difficult to balance in the same time. I'm really fortunate that I've been able to make it work and kind of do supplemental things and use this massive, like, skill base that I have in the world of athletics. So I worked as a personal trainer for a long time, which I always say is like the family business other than being a performing artist, because both my mom and my dad did the same thing. So I grew up seeing that and experiencing that, at least in my younger childhood. And my dad worked as a personal trainer. And so I had a kind of a pathway sort of laid out ahead of me that I was like, that seems something that I could do that is supplementary and like can be helpful and can be flexible enough to support my ultimate goal of being like a full-time working artist.
Yeah.
Mostly it's about being flexible and just recognizing like, this is not working like this, so we got to do it like this. And I think that's been the biggest kind of like helpful takeaway from my life thus far as an athlete, and having to shift gears in the way that I did as like a teenager.
What was it about athletics and performing that initially captured your imagination and captured your heart?
My parents were a huge influence on me. My mother was a professional dancer and continued to dance after I was born. So I have very vivid memories of being in the baby swing thing,
Yeah.
And you just sit there and you're a potato and you swing before you can like do anything or walk, and you're just experiencing life. And she would twirl around in front of me in all of her amazing, like custom beaded gowns and stuff. And I remember that being really young and just being like, well, that seems like a great thing to spend my time doing later also. And my dad, he's been a performing artist my entire life. So it was something that was kind of always right in front of me, but I knew from a really young age exactly what I wanted to do. There was a period of time that was kind of rough for me and my mom in my childhood, and some kind of heavy stuff going on, and it wasn't the best situation for a young kid to be in. But I remember watching the movie Hook on TV. I remember thinking a lot up until that point. I was like 4 at this point. And I remember being like, I think I want to be a doctor and I want to help people, but I also want to be a teacher and I want to help people doing that. And I also want to be a dancer, of course. And I want to do acting, and I want to be an astronaut really bad. And and I was like, there were all these things. And I remember having the moment of like, if I'm an actor, I can do all of those things. I can literally do all of those things. And I realized, and this realization came later, and I'm still unpacking it. But I remember as I was watching Hook, I was watching the kids. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie, the Robin Williams movie. That's like, okay, great.
Yeah.
The cinematic masterpiece that is Hook. And the Lost Boys are sitting there, and Peter has just gone through his training montage, and it's very funny and very cute and very sweet. And they're sitting there, and he's all sore, and he's like, I'm so excited to eat dinner, blah, blah, blah. And he still hasn't quite bought into the whole, experience of Neverland yet. and they're like, okay, well, we're going to eat. And then he's like, where's the food? You know, and they're like, you have to imagine the food. It's a game. And he's like, I don't want to play a game. I want to eat food. And they're like, well, then you should probably start seeing food in front of you, you know? And it kind of tied into some things that were happening in my life as well at the time. And it was really powerful moment for me. But I was like, oh my God. Like, I just had the moment of sitting there and being like, these kids are playing pretend in a movie where I'm watching it, and it's making me feel so much better. It's giving me so much comfort personally. Like, that could just be me doing that for some other kid someday. I had this like light bulb moment, like, oh, okay, well, that's it. Like, obviously that's my job, is to help people feel better, to help people relate, to tell stories, to hold stories that are important and make sure they don't die and, you know, or get lost in the mix of the crazy world that we live in. And I was like, well, okay, well, there we go. That totally makes sense. It was like that moment really clicked into my head. It was like, oh, my job is to tell stories, and it's to do it in a way that helps people to relate to each other and to help people feel like the best version of themselves, or to inspire them, or to help them process whatever's going on in their lives. And so that became the thing, right? It was like, yes, you do that through acting, but you can also do that through dance. You can also do that through music. And you can also tell a story, you know, as an athlete, in the way that you show up, in the way that you are present in a space where maybe other people that don't look like you are present, you know? And so it all kind of like wrapped together to form this kind of like big idea of like, the job is to be present in spaces in order to create access for other people that maybe couldn't have access to that space without you there first, or to show the way, or to clear the road of the roadblocks, or you know, whatever things might prohibit somebody from being seen or heard or expressing themselves in a certain way. Whether they're an actor or performer or not, whatever they want to do in life, they're a nurse, or if they're a mechanic or whatever, you know.
It really does feel like your inspiration, the inspiration for your journey, has really been finding ways, whether it's been through dance or martial arts or theater or all of these different things. Maybe the way that all of these come together is in what deeply moves you, which is helping other people. And this is really, you know, you're doing that through all of these different channels. Can you talk more about that?
I was doing a show like, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, and there was a little girl sitting in the front row, and she, you know, I found out later that she's a mixed kid, and you know, she had curly hair like mine. And I kind of like had a moment, you know, and a wave to her, and our face, like, we had a moment, and it was really great. And she wrote a note to the theater about how, like, I liked the show a lot, and I thought it was really fun, and I thought that maybe I would want to do that, but I don't know how. But then I saw the creature that had curly hair and looked like me, and when she waved at me, it made me feel really special and happy, and I want to see more of that. One little moment in a sea, you know, of moments where you do receive validation in that way, which is so like special and like wonderful every time, if it happens, where I was just like, right, you know, I think the point is, it's not exactly what I'm doing, but it's about the energy that I bring and just showing up at all. Because battling imposter syndrome is kind of a constant, you know, struggle and a constant journey, especially when you do find yourself feeling very different from the other people in the room. And being a performing artist in Portland, Oregon specifically, means that I am often one of the only people of color, or a lot of the times one of the only women. If I'm in like an athletic or martial arts space, it oftentimes ends up being that way. So it's a hard thing to unpack, to constantly be like, am I supposed to be here, you know? And then to just be like, no, absolutely, I'm supposed to be here, because that little girl in the front row maybe wants to be here one day too, and it might be easier for her if she has this person. If I had seen this person, I would maybe have been a little bit more bold in the way that I moved, you know, in the world as a young artist as well. So it really is nice in a way, because it's not about me. It's about like forging a path, you know, so that I come back to that a lot, which helps me to kind of like diffuse the intrusive thoughts of you don't deserve to be here, or you're not supposed to be here. The main goal is, it's been reinforced to me so many times in so many different ways, how important it is to just be present in the space, to just like show up, to do the thing, which sounds silly a little bit, but it's just like, man, just seeing a woman do this thing is like, that's what got me to that point where I'm like, yeah, I could totally do that. Like, why would I think that I couldn't do that? But it's hard when you don't have that anchor point to kind of usher you into the space. So I want to keep being that as much as I can, even though sometimes it's a little bit terrifying and uncomfortable, but it's bigger than me, so I can let that go because I'm like, it's not about me. It's about that girl in the front row with the curly hair that wants to see more of the goofy lemur creature that looks like her rolling around on stage, so,
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about how your multicultural, multi-ethnic background has informed your approach to your work?
It's something that I've only recently started to really figure out is actually like a superpower, because there's a lot of, it's really challenging to know that you are going to always be challenging. And what I mean by that is people have a hard time perceiving all of the things. Like, I'm very mixed and I know about most of it. And we have lots of really great records from the French side of the family that came over on the first ships that came from France to the Americas, like that's very exciting. And I know some other things, and we've done DNA tests and stuff. And I also know how I grew up and what cultural practices were a part of mine and my sister's childhood. And it's been a journey in this very kind of push and pull, like, struggle to figure out how to just be, first of all. And there's always the conversation around like code switching, which is like something that I think most people have to do. Some people have to do it more than others. Some people choose to do it more than others. And it's the idea of, picking and cherry picking certain parts of your identity that are going to show up more in a certain space. And it's interesting when the conversation is around safety, right? But I think, anybody that has been in a space where it's not predominantly filled with other folks that are like them has to do that to some degree at any time, and I know a lot of women have to do that in tech spaces. And like, for a brief time, I was going to school for theoretical cosmology, and like that was what a journey to be the only young, very young woman in, a space where it's only men with PhDs that are very certain that they know and will always know more than you, like, even if you're the one giving a presentation about your research that they're all there to learn, or, any of those situations where you're like, you would think that this would be easy to, like, why do we have to power struggle right now? Like, why is this the thing that we're doing?
Yeah.
It's just like,
yes. And even if it's not overt, there are these microaggressions that happen,
exactly.
right? Like these little things that happen in time. And sometimes it's not until it may be, hours later, days later, you're thinking back to these times, right? And it's like, wow, wait a minute. Right. And you really think about what has happened. And to your point, why you're presenting your own research, right? Why is there a power struggle here?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I have the laser pointer. I am at the front of the room. Like, let's not make it a thing, boy. Like,
right. Yeah. It's amazing what we experience. It's amazing what we experience from that perspective, and it's also amazing that there are, other men and other people out there who are absolutely our allies and our advocates.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do we engender more of that to be out there for all of us? Yeah. Absolutely.
It's a constant conversation and a constant journey, but it was those times, especially when I was like, in going to college the second time around when I was a little older, closer to adulthood, it was, those experiences were really helpful for me to try to start to piece together like this thing of like, oh, right. Okay. So there's constantly this stratification, like humans are finding where they are in the lineup of each other. And whether we talk about it or not, there's constantly power dynamics going on. Right. And when that has to do with cultural background or perceive, like what people perceive you to be is different a lot of the times than what you are when you're mixed, just because people are confused most of the time. Intrigued is good, curious and wanting to learn is good. Confused and annoyed and angry about it is not as good. And people sometimes go there when they can't quite like fix you into a certain space that makes sense to their brain or their experience. So it's been something that's taken me a while to embrace, and it's a constant conversation for me to unpack my own like internalized racism and internalized colorism, which is a really big topic among mixed kids specifically, because there is this constant kind of nonverbal or verbalized thing, you know, this conversation that manifests in different ways about like where are like, you know, sussing each other and everyone else out based on that, and how much privilege do I actually have and how much privilege do, you know, other people have, and weighing that. Like my sister and I are both mixed and we have very different life experiences because she's simply darker skinned than I am. Like it's very different for her, especially after moving to Oregon. So that's been something that's been really interesting for me to like figure out where my boundary is or where my line is and like how much can I push here. But I think overall it's been, especially in the last few years, especially since my daughter was born, it's been this really interesting kind of evolution into really like leaning into all of the very, very seemingly very different like cultural influences and pieces of the picture, the big puzzle that is Bevin, that like is really what makes me awesome, I think, in a lot of ways. And it's been nice to kind of grow into. I wish it had been happening earlier, of course, but I'm glad that for my daughter's generation, at least, it's the conversations are more open. But like people really being open about having conversations about ethnicity and like passing versus not passing, and these more nuanced things that are really nuanced and really present all the time, but not always like aired, you know. And so I think for me, it's been such a gift to have this like really rich tapestry to like pull from, to inspire me, and to also to anchor me in a sort of sense of having a responsibility to be a steward of these specific kind of things and traditions and parts of my cultural background that feel really important and are essential to preserve and to honor in specific ways, or just general by being a present person in the world. It's been nice for me to start to try to tie that more into my work in an intentional way. And I didn't realize that I was until a couple of years ago when I made my first short film, and some of the feedback, you know, from the people that worked on the film, like was like, wow, this is really personal. And I'm like, well, how could it not be? I made it. You know, and they're like, well, you know, some people write stories that have nothing to do with them. And I'm like, I feel grateful that like my life is so rich with things to pull from that I don't really have to, I don't even have to write fantasy most of the time because, yeah, you know, my journey to this point is wild and really just full, like super full.
And being that role model, right? Or having that little girl in the audience see you, right? And recognize the similarity, and then to give her that confidence within her own journey to go on and to see that there are opportunities, you know, and possibilities out there for her. And you gave her that gift, right? You're passing it along, which is so just so beautiful in how you're able to lift others up, right? And really make a difference in that way. Yeah. So you've mentioned a couple of different times challenges along the way, whether it was the injury that you had, I think in your teen years, some of the difficulties that you had growing up. What deeply resonates for me is the resilience that you've shown through all of these different and challenging experiences. Can you talk a little bit about those challenges, how you persevered through them, and what you think some of the lessons were that you took out of those experiences?
I think uncertainty is probably the biggest theme of like a working artist's life, is like what is my next project if I'm not creating it? Where is it going to come from? Is it going to come? What do I have to do in order to like make my life work next month or whatever, you know? And like riding those waves can be really challenging sometimes. But I think, you know, because of the big kind of events, there's so many kind of big, I think that could have been, that classified as catastrophic events in my life that completely could have derailed me, or maybe even did for a small period of time. The one through line for me was, again, it's not just about me succeeding is not just about me. I have to do this because my sister, and I have to do this because my mother, I owe it to the people that I care about to keep pushing. And so that, for better or for worse, I remember the first time, so I had the gymnastics injury. I think you learn to kind of go okay, that is bad. My thoughts on this are, this sucks. What's next? What do we do? How do we, or okay, I'm going to give myself 5 minutes to freak out. I can scream and cry and do all that I want. And, I think athletics really hones this in. And if you already have the personality type of being all right, what are the facts? We got to move. What's going on? We can't sit here and be sad, or, so not to diminish the process of people feeling their feelings. I think what I had to learn to do out of literal necessity was say to myself, it is fine that you feel how you feel. This is not ideal. It actually is really the worst thing ever that you could have ever thought. This is the worst thing. So here you are at rock bottom. This is the worst possible scenario. I guess the only thing to do is, what do you want to do? Dig down? Or do you want to try to do something else, and sometimes it's not always up to you, especially when you're a kid. And I remember having the feeling of well, what do you want to do? What's your choice? What are your real choices? It's totally fine to be upset this. And that took me a while to be it's okay to be crying about this. It's okay to be upset about this. You don't have to be stone faced, robot athlete girl, go, perfect all the time. It took me a long time. It's still a process. That is definitely a daily conversation that I have with myself. I grew up between here. I'm from San Francisco originally. We moved to New Mexico and we lived here. But my dad lived in LA for most of that time. So it was back and forth between Portland and LA from age 11 or something like that, 12, right after the gymnastics injury happened, a few months after that. It's very different to live there and pay rent there than it is to be a child and living in your parents' house. And I learned that really quickly, and I lived in my car, and I didn't always get to eat food every day. And it was really, really bad. But the bottom line was I just took out, I was I have to change the story. The story is, Bevin moves to LA, becomes a big, big star. Everything works out great within a year. Boom, boom, bing, bang, boom. That's not the story. Apparently that's not the story. So we're doing a rewrite. What are we going to do? And I remember sitting in my car and being okay, Bevin stays in LA and continues to suck. No, I was okay, let's think more ideas. What do we got here? I stay here and, things that are out of my control continue to be out of my control. Okay, well, what's in my control? And then I was oh, here's a system, right? This is what I can do. I can just change the entire backdrop of this whole thing. If finding success means living in LA and being a struggling actor, then I've found success doing that. I'm very struggling. I'm an actor. Those things have not changed. But maybe I want to do something else. And I don't need that to be the part of the story that we focus on right now. So I could come back to that later, or maybe we just change it. And I was okay, I just move back. I just do this somewhere else. I just go and live with my parents for a minute. It's okay. And so it was learning how to just change the story. I think my life has been so dictated by this idea of being a storyteller that it's everything plays out that way. So the failures, the successes, all of it. I'm how does this fit into the story? Right. And I'm well, this chapter is a bummer. So let's just end it and move on. And I think giving myself that tool, pulling myself out of the wallowing, oh God, I'm useless, I'm worthless, talentless, no one will ever love me, blah, pulling myself out of that, even just long enough, through tears, to be well, I just want to write a new chapter, it was this thing that it all made sense to do it that way. At each one of those landmarks, I sort of started to realize oh, okay, there's a way that I can. How do I move? How do I move forward? I just need to keep moving, even if that means walking in circles at the bottom of this bottomless pit. I can barely see the sky up there. Whatever metaphor I needed to make it make sense in my brain. Each one of those kind of really low points or kind of catastrophic moments where, I was oh, I might not make it out of this, or I don't know how I recover from this, even if it's not a literal life or death thing. It's like, it feels like a small death of myself. I spent time like getting comfortable with like mourning the person that I was before I was in that situation, and then being like, well, this new person has new skills. So the me I am today is not the me that got me into this situation. And I still love her and care for her and honor her, even if I was just saying that and didn't believe it, right? It's just like the act of doing it. Like, I still care for that version of Bevin. She's fine. She made a mistake. It's okay. But this version has a different option because I know better now.
Yeah. And what's amazing, I think, is that you saw and realized that you had the power to be your authentic self, to write your own story, right? And okay, well, that decision didn't quite work out. Okay, well, guess what? I get to end that chapter because it's my story.
Yeah.
I get to, wrap up that chapter, and what's my next chapter?
Yeah.
Right? And the ability for you to be able to see that you had that power and that control because you're the teller of your own story.
And just
yeah.
coming back to this idea of like the human I am at this moment is not the human that even logged on to this. You know what I mean? Like I learned something. I'm already different. I've evolved. I've changed. And I think that's what having like a very varied cultural background also kind of really helps you with, is because you're like, I'm constantly prepared to think about myself as a different version of me, or a new version that I'm discovering. And once I figured that out, it really changed my game personally. I was in the audition room or something for some weird commercial, and I remember being really insecure about my outfit because I couldn't buy new clothes. I remember sitting there and somebody was like, oh yeah, the girl has really like lead character energy. And I was like, what is that? And I was like, oh, lead character energy. And I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. I was like, oh, maybe I could like just go in with that. And then I was like, wait, lead character energy of what story? Like, who are we talking with? And I was like, wait, everybody should have lead character. They're the lead character in their own story. Like, and I was like, wait. So it was this funny moment that really like struck my young ego and like made me think about just being, like what, yeah, am I like actually showing up like in my own story, or am I kind of just like letting life happen to me? It's something I keep coming back to that really helps me to like anchor to like, you have a little bit more control here than maybe you're thinking. Let's think about the ways that you can guide the story in a more pleasant for you direction, or a more, desirable direction, which I think is such a helpful tool for kids too. Oh my gosh. Like I try to talk with my daughter in those terms, and she's just like, yeah, that is better than this being a bummer and me having no control.
Absolutely. Wow. So of all of the different experiences that you have had, and they have been so varied and vast, what are you proudest of?
I'm really proud of the film that I made a couple of years ago. The truth about it is like, it did not do, I didn't get accepted into any film festivals. It was really well done, and I appreciated it, but I needed it to go that way, I guess, at that point in my life, to really, really make me go like, how dedicated are you to this specific path? Like, do you want this regardless of if you find commercial success or a success as you established it in the beginning of the process? Can you find enjoyment in it even if it doesn't go the way you think it's going to go? Do you truly love it? Like, how much do you love it? And so I appreciate the process for that, because I do think that I did a good job based on the budget that I had, and who I had involved, and what resources I had and didn't have available to me. I'm proud of it. And it taught me that, like, even though it did not land the way that I'd hoped or imagined it would, it taught me that I do love it. I really do love it.
So this is a great segue into this whole area of the definition of success, our own definitions of success, and how they've morphed and changed over time. How do you define success for yourself? And it sounds like for you as well, it has changed over time.
Yeah, it's definitely changed over time. I think the biggest thing for me is is that the idea of success as a fixed idea is a recipe for failure, right? Like that's just how you guarantee that you for sure aren't going to hit those marks, because there's always something changing. You're changing. The situation is changing. The people involved, the other players, the support team, the resources you have, you don't have, all of that stuff is in flux all the time. At least what does success look like? What does that mean? Be clear with yourself so you can at least give yourself like a real point in time and space that you're working towards, or so that you know what you want, right? Like, what does success look like? And am I moving towards something without that clearly defined in my mind? That maybe is not going to be helpful to me. So can I define success? What does it mean? Can I write it out? Can I just say it out loud one time so I know what I'm doing? That was step 1, right? And then step 2 was like, it's a moving target a little bit, right? Like, or maybe I have to redefine success and get comfortable with redefining success. And that in itself isn't inherently a failure, but it's just a pivot. It's just a change, and it's okay. And then like the third step or process in that has been like, can I completely change the definition right now in this moment to suit what I'm doing right now so that I've achieved success, so I can feel that feeling for a second and then move from there? Can I just do that? What happens if I do that? And for a long time, I thought doing that was like, oh, you're going to stop working. You won't be working hard then. If you say that you're successful right now, you can't do that. You can't be successful now, because then what? Are you going to just die? Is the whole story over? Like, what, are you just going to lie down and go to sleep for the rest of it? And I was like, whoa, buddy. First of all, like, maybe that's not your narrative. Maybe that's not coming from you. Maybe that's some like leftover angry coaches or like people that are pushing you for their own reasons, or like that doesn't sound like the most caring, progressive attitude. So where is that coming from? And I was realizing that a lot of it was left over, like on unpacked stuff from old athletic times, and this idea that if you're not constantly like running uphill at full speed, then you're not actually working that hard, so you probably can't be successful, not even now, not ever, and it's like, well, okay, I get why we push and we train ourselves in that way, but like, work smarter, not harder. Can I change the definition of success in this moment to be exactly where I'm at, and just sit with that feeling and watch how it changes my vibration, like moving forward? And that has been probably the most powerful tool that I've learned thus far, is just being able to say like, hey, look around you. Like, you did it. You don't remember that time you said you wanted exactly this thing right now? Like, you did it. So maybe just sit down for 1 minute, take a drink of water, take a break and just feel the feeling of like, you've achieved that. It doesn't mean the journey's over. It doesn't mean the story ends. It doesn't mean you're stopping. It doesn't mean you're lazy. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you've sold out. It doesn't mean any of these weird things that you've swirled around that are, some of them are not your ideas. It just means you're giving yourself a moment to say like, hey buddy, like okay, cool. Just give yourself a chance to be feeling that sensation of like, yes, like sit in the feeling of success.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important for us to celebrate those small wins along the way, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, it doesn't mean, okay, now I'm done, now I'm over, right? But at least we can celebrate the accomplishments we do have along our path.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what advice would you give either your younger self, or what advice would you give to other women?
If I could give myself any advice, I would go back in time to 6-year-old me. I was auditioning for Annie, and I was in second callbacks. And I remember like coming out of the room and being like, I like really left it all out. Like, I really laid it all out there. And I don't think they're going to cast me because I don't look like any of the other girls. So I just didn't go back. I got called back, and I didn't go for the next round. Cause I remember talking myself down. It's like, it doesn't matter how you did. It's not going to happen for you in there. Like, as a 6-year-old, and it's so sad and so tragic. And so I would like go back in time, and I'd be like, okay, kid, grab my hand. We're going to run. We're going to get an ice cream. I'm going to give you a pep talk. You're going to go back in there and you're going to finish. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's too soon. Maybe you're not going to get cast, but you have to at least see it through, because it's not about you. It's about so many more other kids than you. And just think about, if you break down the door, at least by showing up in there. And I know it's hard, and it shouldn't be your responsibility because you're so little and so young and you just want to do good in the world. But like, if you can just do this, if you can just find the strength to do this, imagine all the other girls that look like you. And then nobody has to feel like that ever again. You'll be the last one. Or maybe you won't, but you're at least starting the process, you know, like you can be the one to kick down the door. And I know you love kicking stuff. So I would do that. And I would, you know, like hold my little hand and like walk back in there with her and be like, you're going to do this. You're going to sing your heart out and you're going to do a little pas de bourrée and a jazz square. And they're going to think whatever they think about you. And it doesn't even matter because you're great and you showed up and you did the thing and you'll always know that like you did your best. And so I would do that. And what advice I would give to other women is like, if I could imbue every woman on planet Earth with the permission that she needs to show up in any space as her full self, I would give that. Like, please know that there is no space that you don't belong in, that you shouldn't be able to show up as your full self in, and that you shouldn't feel safe in. Like, you should feel safe and welcome in any space in the world, because we make the world go round. I still don't get how we got here where we have to even like ask each other or ourselves for permission to do things or to show up to spaces. But like, I wish for every woman that she could feel 100% confident with all of the amazing things that she has to offer, and the uniqueness and like the one in a billionness that each person brings into whatever space they're in, to just feel empowered by that. And the more of us that do it, the easier it will be for us to do that for ourselves too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Bevin, what does She Lights the Way mean to you?
It means being a beacon of, whether it's like inspiration or hope or safety or stability or something, even if it isn't always like easy to describe or easy to categorize or quantify, but just being something that's in space that you can like anchor to, whether that's a person in a room that says other people's names to give them opportunities, or just shining your own light into the world so that other people feel inspired to do that too. Like this font of like authenticity and realness and like heart and integrity that like shines out into the world, that people can look at and go like, oh my gosh, I could do that too. I could do exactly that too. And if we all did it, like, what would happen?
You are such a bright light. You've shined such a bright light for others, right? From the little girl in the audience to your sister to so many other women who see themselves, right, in your performances and in all of what you're doing. I thank you for being a part of She Lights the Way and for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been really great. I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it.
I hope you found value in my conversation with Bevin Victoria. Her story is truly one of undeniable badassery. You know, our paths are rarely straightforward, and Bevin's story is a great reminder of overcoming obstacles and creating space for others. You can learn more about Bevin's work and connect with her on her website. That link is in the show notes. I'd love for you to share your thoughts about our conversation. As always, feel free to leave your comments on any of the social handles for the project, or shoot me an email at nicole@shelightstheway.com. I hope you follow She Lights the Way for more badass stories coming your way. Until next time.